Hi everyone, it's Lori here at the Land of Color. I tried to stream earlier and it just didn't work. I just could not get a connection. So it's about 6:30 here, so I don't know what time it is wherever you are, but hopefully it's this evening and after dinner and all that good stuff. So I wanted to do a follow-up to the live session that I did a couple days ago about online color consultations and some of the challenges that we have to deal with. And if you recall, we talked about the human gamut of color, which is the color space you see right next to me here on the slide. I don't know if you guys can't see my mouse and my pointer, so I guess I'll just use my finger. This right here. So we talked about that the other night. So you understand that this is all of the colors that we can see and the colors that we can't see and colors that can't be made. And this is the sRGB color space that we have to work with on all of our devices. And it's a gamut of color, if you recall. A gamut is like a bucket of color. So this is the boundaries, or this is the color space that we have to deal with when we're working with color online. And it comes with limitations. Some colors get clipped off or remapped because they are outside of the boundaries of this color space. So we talked about that a couple nights ago. And tonight I want to go into part 2. The other reason why online color is so difficult and why it's so different from in real life color. And that's because we're dealing with two different kinds of color. We have additive color and we have subtractive color. And the sRGB color space, RGB stands for red, green, and blue, and those are channels of colored light. So you can mix those colors in various quantities to make a whole range of colors, right? Millions of colors. I forget what the number is. But when you mix the channels of light to create different colors on your displays, on your monitors, on your devices, that's emitted light to your eyeballs. So additive, it's called additive color. And additive color is emitted light to your eyeballs, like I said. And that creates a certain kind of sensation or a visual experience. And that's different than in real life color. And in real life color, lots of people will refer to CMYK. CMYK is cyan, magenta, yellow, and the K actually stands for key. It's the key color. It's the darkest color in the run. There, the slide just popped up. I'm a little bit ahead of the slide. So when people talk about in real life color versus the additive color, the illuminated color that you see on your devices, people usually think of CMYK first. And again, the K is not black. The K stands for key. Anybody who worked in graphic design before the early 1990s will never call that K black. They will always call it key. If it's after 1990s, a lot of people make the assumption that it's black, but it's not. It's for key colors. So anyway, cyan, magenta, and yellow are colors of ink, and I mapped a typical CMYK color space onto our human gamut of colors so you can see how big that bucket of color is. So the printer that you have at your desk, your color printer, this is about, within these boundaries, these are the colors that it's able to print. And as you can see, this shape or this quantity, this bucket of color is different than the sRGB color space that your device can display. So one of the things that color management, well, maybe the primary thing, color management, the task of color management in graphic design, its function, its primary function is to cope with the different color spaces and figure out how to get what you see on your device out onto a piece of paper. How do we translate red, green, and blue light that we see on our screen into a mix of cyan, magenta, yellow, and black inks to print on white paper, or it might be a colored piece of paper, which has to be taken into consideration too. So that's one of the functions of color management, is to figure all of that out. So through this whole discussion of additive color and the channels of light, red, green, and blue light mixing to make color, and cyan, magenta, yellow, and black inks mixing to print colors on paper, none of it has anything to do with paint colors, right? None of it has anything to do with formulas. None of it has anything to do with paint colors. It's a whole different genre of color, RGB and CMYK. And the only reason why we have to deal with RGB or CMYK in our architectural color world, in interior design world, working with color, is if you want to create a digital swatch of a paint color, then you have to figure out the quantities, how much red light needs to be in the mix, how much green, how much blue light, you know, what is that recipe of colored light to mimic your in real life paint chip. And then the same thing goes if you want to try to print it. What's the recipe? How much cyan, magenta, yellow, black do we have to mix together to get something that looks like the real in-life paint chip to print on a piece of paper? So those are the only times that architectural paint colors cross over into this sRGB world and the CMYK world. And I've heard many times people explain that the reason why online color is so different is because in real life color is CMYK. Well, no, no. In real life color is a different color space. CMYK is only about ink. And while CMYK is in a different space than additive color, where RGB is and colored lights are, the real world color isn't just about the ink colors. So when we are talking about those illuminated lights, the red, green, and blue lights mixing to make color in the additive color space, like in your device, the other color space, like I said, I forgot that slide, sorry. CMYK is about ink, so let's move on to the next slide. So the other color space is subtractive color. So the other side of additive color, I guess you could kind of say, not really the other side because these don't really align ever, but you have additive color, which are your channels of light that light up to make the different colors on your device, on your monitor. In real life color is called subtractive color, and subtractive color is reflected light to your eye. So additive color is emitted light to your eye, which creates a certain sensation, a certain experience of color. And subtractive color is reflected light to your eye, which creates yet another kind of visual experience and a different kind of sensation to your eye. So they're two different experiences. Illuminated color and reflected color. It's two different visual experiences, which is yet another reason why online color consultations are such a challenge, because you have a gap, right? You have to figure out a way to bridge the gap between your additive color space and that experience and the subtractive experience of color. So that's a challenge for online color consultations. One strategy or one tactic to compensate, to overcome that gap, is to send your clients the real chips, the paint chips directly from the paint manufacturers, before you send them your digital file, if you've done a digital rendering, if you've painted the house virtually, or if you've created an inspiration board for them using your chips. So if they have the real paint chip in hand while they're viewing your digital work, the brain will make those connections, and it will make it a more accurate experience for them as far as viewing your digital work that you have to share with them. So that's one strategy to get over the gap between the online color world, online additive color world, and our in real life subtractive color world. And again, RGB and CMYK really doesn't have anything to do with this. They're kind of in a separate category, although we have to integrate them sometimes. That they're not the reason why online color is different. It's about additive and subtractive color. So a word about paint chips, because I suggested that you send, you just order the paint chips online and you have the large paint chips just sent directly to your client before you send them your digital files. I do that. That's one of the ways I work virtual color. A big deal has been made about hand-painted samples. I think that's a load of crap too. There's a lot of stuff that I think is just a load of crap. You don't have to have a hand-painted sample. I think that's dumb. It comes from a misunderstanding as far as what the paint chips are from the manufacturers. Those paint chips, even though they're ink on paper or lacquer on paper, I don't even know how they're made. It kind of doesn't matter what they're made of, to be honest, because in the end, the bottom line is the color resolution, the color that's on that chip has to meet a certain standard. It has to meet a specification. It has to be a good enough match before they will release it as a paint chip, as a viable paint chip to use in the market. Duha Group is one resource that makes paint chips, and I emailed with Rick Duha just a couple months ago, and I said, so what are your standards? And they have very strict standards as far as what qualifies for a color match for their paint chips, for all of the collateral that they produce. So having a hand-painted sample really doesn't give you that much of an advantage, if any advantage, because the sample that they're making has to meet the very same target that the paint chip manufacturer people have to meet, right? So everybody has the same target, the same data to use to make the color, and they all have to meet the same standard, and they're working towards the same target. So do you really have to buy a paint sample, or can you just order a paint chip that has to meet the very same standard as the guy mixing a color to go jug? And in a way, the paint chip is a safer bet because you don't have that factor of human intervention mixing up the color sample. So then the second point of contention is, well, the finish of the paint chip isn't the same as the finish as a real hand-painted sample. Most samples only come in one gloss level. Color to go jugs are all made in satin. So you're kind of already having to compensate for a different finish if you're not going to purchase, if the final gloss level isn't satin. So you're testing the color in a satin finish just because that's the way the color to go jug comes, but what if you're using duration matte for the project? So you're already making concessions for the finish by buying a sample pot, by using a hand-painted sample. So unless you're going to buy a quart in the brand, sheen, and color that you ultimately are going to use on the wall, it has to, you're not comparing apples to apples then. So why not take advantage of the large paint chips directly from the paint manufacturer, and don't worry about the hand-painted business until you get down to making final decisions. And you can make final decisions from a paint chip. That happens all the time. There's nothing wrong with that. And the fact that I guess it makes for a good soundbite in blogosphere to say, don't use paint chips, because they aren't real paint. That's a real, that's an attention-getting little tidbit there that causes some alarm and give somebody something to point to and blame. Oh, well, that's my problem. I was using paint chips and I have to go buy a dozen different samples because those paint chips don't tell me anything that's of value. And that's not exactly true. That's not true at all. You can use paint chips and they're plenty accurate. And that's coming from someone who I sell hand-painted samples in my online store, okay? And I also sell a circle-shaped paint peel and stick sample decal to use with color samples to test paint colors, to audition, as they say, paint colors. So I sell product that is better supported by the idea that paint chips suck and you shouldn't use them. And I'm telling you, that's not true. You can use a paint chip and you can get by just fine, and you can use those other tools like the paint peel and stick color sample decals when you need it. They're there if you need it. One thing about the decals that I sell, this it's called Swatch Right, is they're very thin vinyl. So when you put a thin film of paint over those, it can conform to the texture of the wall. So unlike a flat painted board, the texture of the wall does telegraph through the decal, so that does give you an advantage. That does give you a little more information as far as what that color is going to look like on your wall, as opposed to a flat board, which there's, what's the difference between a flat piece of paper and a flat board with paint on it and one with ink on it if they both measure with the same spectral data, if they both have the same fingerprint of color characteristics? It just doesn't make sense. So, use those paint chips. They're fine to use. Have them sent in advance before you send your digital files. This is one way to bridge the gap between the difference in experience between online color and in real life color. I do teach all of this stuff in Camp Chroma. We go over, we talk about all of these things in more detail, the color spaces in particular, the background on the color spaces, and I do award a certificate and a badge at the end of the class because I think it's important to let people know that when you've completed a course like Camp Chroma, that there's some indication that you've done more than just, read a couple books or a couple blog posts or gone to a couple informal seminars put on by the paint companies or whatever. So the badge, I'll try to pop one up here so you can see it. There it is. You do get a certificate of completion and you do get a badge for your website to let people know that you are a color strategist and you've done the work and the homework to understand color spaces like RGB and CMYK and what spectral data is and why it's okay to use a paint chip. You could actually measure a paint chip and compare it to the sample that you purchased, and you can see just how accurate your color sample is and compared to the paint chip from the paint manufacturer. So these aren't just abstract concepts. These are things that you can, after Camp Chroma, you know how to go do, and you can prove it out for yourself. And I've proved it out for myself many times, which is the only reason why I'm which is where my color point of view comes from. I've done it, and I know paint chips are just fine. You don't have to go all hog wild and paint up this huge collection of hand-painted samples and schlep those with you everywhere you go, thinking that that's the only possible way there is to work with color, because it's not. There are other ways. There are more efficient ways. There are different ways to approach architectural color, and you'll learn those different strategies and tactics in Camp Chroma. So if you joined me live, thanks for joining me, and sorry I couldn't get this done earlier. I tried, and I hope you find these impromptu Facebook Live sessions valuable. If you have any topics that you'd like me to discuss on future sessions, you can just send me an email at lori@thelandofcolor.com and let me know what you'd like to talk about. So until next time, guys, bye.